Listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hey everybody, good evening. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. We are live, of course, talking about the biggest issues in education. So where better to start than the issue of AI in assessment? So about 4 weeks ago, I had the privilege and pleasure of interviewing one of the great and good when it comes to assessment, Daisy Christodoulou. And we were talking about her plans for assessing in the realm of history using AI. Now that show was our most downloaded and listened to show, maybe not watched, but certainly listened to show last month on Teachers Talk Radio. So it was very popular with our listeners. Many of you listened to it. Some of you commented on it. And one of those people who listened to it is sat here with me today, which is Ben Walsh. I'll introduce Ben just in a moment. But before I do so, it would be remiss of me to not mention our fantastic sponsors and supporters on Teachers Talk Radio, one of whom is John Catt Educational, who are publishers of books and resources for teachers in the UK and globally. And you can find them at the John Catt Bookshop, johncattbookshop.com, and you can buy any manner of educational book on there. Think of a topic, put it into the search bar in John Catt, and they will undoubtedly have a book to meet your CPD needs on that particular topic. And you can get a discount by using JCTTR 2425 in the store, which is great to know as well. I will come on to our other supporters later. But what we're going to be discussing this evening is this topic of history, AI and assessment. Ben, welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. How are you this evening?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well. The sun is out. I managed to get a swim in today in the sea.
Oh, very good.
So it's the Atlantic, so it's quite icy cold. It's not the Med. So if you're scared of temperatures, this isn't the sea for you. But it was great. So that's what I managed to do this afternoon, which is cool. What about you? Anything?
Well, I didn't get out for a swim, except just to, sweat it out here in a stuffy cupboard in a school. Not jealous at all on that front.
I mean, we broke up. You see, we've broken up.
Well, just make it worse. Why don't you?
Sorry. It's international education. We do go back though in the middle of August. So
okay.
It was like
make a note of that and enjoy it.
Maybe the 20th or something. Anyways. We'll forget about that for now. So, Ben, you listened to a show that we did 3 or 4 weeks ago with Daisy Christodoulou on AI and assessment with regards to history. Now, I thought we could kick off by just before we get into, because I think from what you've told me that you have some areas of disagreement. But before we maybe get into that, maybe we could think about anything that you listened to that resonated or interested you, or anything that you think is relevant or spot on.
Yeah, sure. I mean, the thing is, it's like with all of these things, isn't it? Your areas of agreement are usually much broader than the areas of disagreement. You know, the disagreement tends to sort of be a lens that gets the focus. But yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I would say sort of the vast majority of the things that Daisy was saying completely chimed for me. So, you know, in no particular order, the big one that I think she completely nailed is how assessment is this constant sort of tightrope between reliability and validity. If you want, I totally spoke to me when she was saying about multiple choice questions that they are reliable. There's no two ways about it. If you ask factual questions, and you can machine mark them usually and that sort of thing as well, they are going to be reliable. But are they valid in the sense of, are we teaching history so kids can do pub quizzes? We actually need to do more than that. And as soon as you bring that validity in to the equation, you're going to get a reduction in reliability. Simple as that. We know that extended writing is always problematic in terms of the reliability of the marking in history and in English in particular. I think the figures are, it's around about half of all scripts exam level are about 5% out from the standard set by the principal examiner. That's a sort of decent working rule of thumb. But is that a counsel of despair, or do we just basically try and find ways to do the best we can with it, rather than not do a thing that is inherently valid, which is to challenge kids with essay type questions or writing paragraphs that make a point. So that definitely, 100% was there as well. I think she also made lots of really good points about the potential for AI in terms of workload. I would go a bit further still. I mean, we're pushing this now with in our trust, and saying the consistency issue there as well. And I think this may be part of the longer term answer to our problem of reliability, is that even if you're getting machine marking using AI bots of some sort or another, then you are probably going to get consistency. Even if they're kind of a bit wrong, they're going to be consistently wrong, and so you can kind of make adjustments in there. And I think this actually opens up the potential for kind of greater teacher headspace. Maybe you've done yours now, but there's a lot of teachers out there at the moment slogging their way through mock exams, probably, or indeed doing. It's not helping. And the fact is that what are we doing that for? In theory, what we're doing it for is to see whether our teaching has landed in the course of this year or this term or whatever it is, and what are we learning about what they're finding easy or what they're finding difficult, and what are we doing about it? Now that sounds great, doesn't it? But the reality is that the teachers are mostly just trying to get the damn thing done. They're not doing a huge amount of thinking, because they're under enormous pressure for the next data drop, to just get the stuff cranked out. And so it just becomes a thing in its own right, rather than actually something that's potentially useful. And I would argue that if we can actually start getting more of this kind of machine marking of extended written pieces, then the teachers can become the moderators of that. The teachers can look at the marks that the AI is allocating and can sort of say, that looks about right, or no, it doesn't. And they can sample, instead of marking 90 exams, they mark 10 between them, and sort of say, did they get it right for you, kind of thing. That's our first challenge. It's certainly the first challenge I found with a lot of my teachers, is that they're inclined to believe the AI over themselves. So you've got to turn that mentality around, and say, no, you're the expert, you're the one who knows this stuff. If there's a discrepancy between you and the AI, the probably likely most sort of situation is that the AI's got it wrong. And
is it though? Is it the most likely? Because Daisy was saying in that show 3 or 4 weeks ago that the variability, humans made more errors on average than the AI did. That's what she
I accept that, what she's saying, if we're talking about marking at scale. But the whole point of the idea is that you get the AI to do the marking at scale, and you get the teachers to do the granular stuff. And the teachers are not just comparing marking; they're looking at anomalies. They're looking at a student that they know and sort of saying, "Well, that's a bit of a surprise mark. Let's go and have a look at that one." So it becomes more of a, they're more in the driving seat, but they've also got more of that headspace. So in a sense, I don't think it's a like comparison.
Does that create bias though? If I know the kids in my class and I come to mark an assessment, does that then create bias in my mark?
Isn't that true everywhere? We are
her argument, she's not here, but her argument on the show was that AI isn't biased because it's just going to be looking at the scripts and not the kids.
Yeah, and the overwhelming likelihood is that you won't be amending those. It might be when you look at something, you think, oh, that's an unusual mark for that student, that they just bombed on a question, and so that's far more likely a scenario than either bias inherent in the AI or in the students, or indeed that they performed well on a particular question. Maybe they, kind of just for some reason or other, they really got the source in that paper where normally they struggle. These sorts of things happen. That's the nature of the beast. But my central point really is that we don't want to be taking the teachers out of that supervisory role of the marking. But as it stands at the moment, if teachers are marking, sort of into the wee hours in order to get a data drop done, then they're going to make mistakes. That's the first thing. The second thing is that like I said at the start, you're negating the whole point of the exercise, because the point of the exercise then becomes to get stuff in for a data drop, and we don't do anything with it. So why did we bother? If we're not going to do anything with that data, and if we're not thinking about what we're learning about the kids as we're marking it, then what's the point?
So what, thinking about what Daisy was saying then, what are your sort of key concerns then, not just with what she was saying, but just in general when it comes to AI and history assessment? What were the things, because you obviously listened to it, there must have been something that made you think, I'm going to message Tom about this.
Well, first of all, I think, again, I would share her concerns about things like, some of the ethical considerations. I mean, we've got to be very, very careful, because it's, especially if you're using commercial sort of bots and that sort of thing, we know that it can be very naughty with data, for example. So we've got to make sure that that's absolutely sort of locked up very, very tight. We also know the problems of hallucination, and again, you were talking about the bias. All the research tends to indicate that as you use chatbots more and more, they get to know you and they start trying to tailor content that will please you, essentially, and clearly that's got potential problems inherent in it as well. And I don't know about you, but I'm not qualified to go into the code and try and figure that out. And in fact, well, from what I understand the people who write the code don't seem to be able to do it either. So there is an element of playing with fire a little bit here. I think that in terms of assessment, as I say, I think that keeping it real in the sense of keep your parameters clear, keep your borders and your red lines clear as well. And then I think that, and these are human issues, aren't they? They're not technological ones. And again, particularly for the assessment, things like your questions, obviously, and your rubrics as well, your mark schemes or whatever. I'll come back onto those a bit later on, if that's okay, because I think there's an issue to explore. Can I just say, though, that I think there's a wider thing outside just assessment with regard to history. I like most people, I pick up on the latest sort of comments and sort of email mail shots and that sort of thing about AI and education. And I get the book after the podcast, sort of like a lot of people. One thing I find particularly problematic with regard to history is this tendency, the evangelists, if you like. As far as I know, none of them are historians or none of them are history teachers, and they're from some other background within education. And it just seems to me like they're determined to push really lousy history on us. If you go into most of these AI and education books and sort of look in the index for the history stuff, the examples that they give are invariably, I think, deeply problematic. So first of all, they tend to work on an assumption that history is awful. So you've got to do weird and whizzy things for it to become palatable. Well, you know what? That doesn't really stack up. I mean, certainly in England, outside of the optional subjects, history is one of the most popular. History is without question the most deep dived subject for Ofsted. Why? Because generally speaking, the history departments are pretty good, so they get put up. So I'm on my 11th Ofsted now in my trust role, and we've had a deep dive in history on every single one. They get put forward. It's as simple as that. So I think that there's a false premise there to start with, that somehow history needs to be made more palatable. And if you look at the kinds of things that they're talking about virtual trips to the past, going back in time and all that jazz. And I'm thinking, well, who's going to decide what the past looks like that you're taking these kids to? Who or what is making the decisions? And so if we're going back to Victorian London, which bit are we going back to? And are we going to a Dickensian one, or are we going back to a sort of hyper technologically advanced for its time? And it all just
presumably, though, in that example, Ben, sorry to cut in, you could put very specific prompts into an AI engine, including the year, including even the date.
Yeah.
And the way that video and AI is advancing, I'd be very surprised that within a few years you couldn't get some sort of virtual world that was more accurate than we could imagine.
Well, again,
because they'll have inputted in the experiences and the first-hand account of people who lived in particular areas at particular times, probably 1,000 times over, sources from the time, all of that will have been inputted in to these video matrix.
Well, okay. I think that's a slightly optimistic sort of timescale, should we say, on that.
Well, maybe. Elon Musk.
But I think the bigger point here is that that's not how it's being pitched. The fundamental premise, like I said, is that history needs to be made palatable. The second fundamental problem is that history is sorted. If we can put all that information in, we'll get it right. Well, that's just not how history works, is it? The whole nature of history is that it is provisional, and it's constructed and it's contested all of the time. And also, which slice of that, are we going to promote sort of Victorian London as a positive, or intentionally or unintentionally, or are we going to go to, I show a video clip from time to time about Bliss Hill, which is one of those Victorian towns that's been reconstructed, and the actors go around and all that sort of thing. And I'm always fascinated by the visitors' reactions. And at one point, the marketing manager is asked, "Why is it all so clean? Where are the slums?" And she quite honestly sort of says, "Well, Granny doesn't want to see that on a Sunday afternoon." And so straight away, so the past is basically what you want it to be.
Again, to play devil's advocate, wouldn't that be the same with textbooks with pictures in them?
Well, I think a lot of it depends on what you do with them, of course. And I think, again, this is the problem with my premise. The premise of these things is you don't need to think anymore. You can just go to the past. We've sorted it for you. And none of the current sort of books that certainly that I'd led are pushing an investigative line. I mean, when Assassin's Creed came out first, for example, to their credit, they approached the HA. This is way back, the original one set in the period of the Crusade. And they said, could you sort of do some work on this and look at, HA is Historical Association, for anyone who doesn't know. And so we ran a little project called essentially, Is Assassin's Creed Good History? And they looked at how that world had been built, and they talked to the gamers, and my favorite episode in all of that was where they had a bit of a dig because the Chevalier de Crac castle in the game has square towers, and in reality it has round towers, and so the year nines that were working on it, so they said, what's going on here, and they said, yeah, we know, but it just looks better in the game when it's got square towers. And they learned a lot that day, about, oh, right, okay, that's interesting, isn't it? And, it's the same with movies, isn't it? You don't expect Hollywood to get it right. It's not their job at all. They're trying to tell a certain story in a certain way. Now, so that's part of my problem with these sort of, here's the past.
Wait, hold. That is suggesting, though, that an AI engine is biased?
I think it probably is. I mean, if you Google AI history videos, AI generating AI history videos, because I did this, because I really am that sad, and I was absolutely staggered to see that almost without exception, the pitch coming from each of these sites was how to create viral content. There was little or no interest in accuracy or in fidelity or in historical method or whatever. And why would there be? But my point is that if you're just calling this stuff up, those videos have been put together with a view, basically clickbait, aren't they? To make it presumably dramatic or revolting or whatever it is. If you look at most of this kind of content, it's trying to be funny, or it's trying to sort of, sometimes it's trying to make points about how the past is terrible and today's better, or whatever it is. But the point is, whichever way you look at it, pitching it as you don't need history anymore because we've got it there for you. That's the main problem I've got. If the history teachers are then going to go in and sort of say, let's break this down, guys. What do we think here? Why have they made it like this? Then brilliant, you've got a terrific lesson going on. But that's not what the evangelists are pushing.
But surely that's what they would do. And there's a couple of things there I'd throw in. So, for example, if I'm going to use any sort of AI engine now or in the future to produce video content or immersive video content or whatever, then the prompting that I input is probably going to contain words like accuracy and lots and lots of words that would indicate to the engine that I didn't want something for entertainment purposes. The purpose of this is for a history lesson for students, and I would be talking about sort of the importance of accuracy, the importance of not adding anything or taking anything away for XYZ purposes or reasons. So, I mean, the videos examples you've given there, I'm by no means saying they don't exist, because I'm sure they do. But like anything with AI, you will get what you put in is what you will get out. So that's presuming that the engine, the people who are putting this stuff, create me the most viral video of medieval times in 1066 as you possibly can. Use as many enticing images as you can, or as many, medieval artifacts that seem to grab people's attention as you can, and then we'll produce a video from it, is very different from inputting sort of very specific 50 bullet points of certain provisos that you would like it to produce along those lines. By the way,
obviously, I have
I'm
no
not
problem
saying
with
AI right now is up to that level where it
Yeah.
can take into account all that. But I know you said optimistic in a few years, but I don't know. I did the way I'm seeing things going. I think there's going to be a real acceleration with video and AI.
But we're also talking not just about the capability, but the will and the intent. And like I said, the kind of scenarios you're describing are, ideal world scenarios, and people who sort of have the time, the interest, the passion, the capability to do all of those sorts of things. And my point really is that what's being thrown at senior leaders in schools, for example, what's being thrown at EdTech conferences is, hey, look, we can take kids to the past. And it's completely missing the disciplinary base, essentially. And if you take another example,
sorry, go on.
Well,
no,
you
I was
just
just saying there's a difference between what you're suggesting there, because that's tech companies selling sort of an AI product to senior leaders or history leaders or whatever. I'm more talking about teachers themselves using large language models, not, history AI, self-made, already straight out the box videos, right? I'm talking about more teachers sort of individually spending a lot of time working with a large language model to create their own. It's a little bit like the old thing of teachers creating their own resources versus buying generic resources from a resource platform, right? We do it to save time. We do it when we're in a mess and it's a last minute hatchet job of, oh my God, I've got to cover a lesson. I better go on and see what I can get, right? Or I've got nothing on this topic. I really need something to base my thoughts on, versus let's plan from scratch. Now, there's where I see the potential differences there in that.
Completely. And as I say, I think that, if you sort of take a step back though from that, and look at the environments, I think you're again describing the best of us and the people who've got the time and the ingenuity and the will and the energy, and they're always going to be, sort of the rock stars, aren't they? But what's being pushed at sort of, the tired non-specialist sort of pressured individuals are these, as you say, out of the box, and often we don't seem to have a huge voice in history in that conversation. I'm certainly experiencing teachers telling me about, well, the leadership bought this and now we've got to somehow use it. Now, I mean, that I've been facing that for 30 years in my interest in sort of ed tech in one way, shape or form. The all-time classic, the school's given us all iPads, what do we do now? That's always been an issue. Can I just get one of these though off my chest, which is this whole business of speaking to past figures through the large language model? I'm very, very nervous about that kind of stuff. Where if we're talking to Nelson Mandela, or if we're talking to Napoleon or whatever, where's the stuff coming from that he's saying? And if we don't know, then, well, we probably shouldn't be doing it. Now, if you were to tie it into something like Notebook LM or something like that, and have some documents with, speeches or diaries of Napoleon, then there's a different ballgame. And that's kind of speaking to the kind of thing you're talking about, isn't it? But the other thing about these kind of, chat to people in the past as well, is that the language that comes back is invariably hopelessly anachronistic. If you're meant to be speaking to a past figure, shouldn't that figure at least vaguely, or not talk about scholars or empowerment, or words that are current to us? That the past is alien. I mean, it should be. That's the whole point of it. Is that we're trying to challenge kids to do challenging things. So yeah, as I say, I there's marvelous stuff going on. I mean, certainly some of the teachers and more just are doing it.
The only thing
but
I'd
I'm
say about
concerned
that is I mean, I'm thinking now back to when I started teaching. Russell Tarr created Henry VIII, and you spoke to Henry VIII and you interviewed Henry VIII. Now, I accept your point that the answers that the virtual Henry VIII gave, and this was going back to, almost back to clip art 98. Do you know what I mean? It's going back a long way. But the answers it gave had obviously been put in by Russell. I can't remember what the answers were, but they've been put in almost textbook style. Right? You ask a question, you get something back.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's kind of my point. There was a closed environment created by somebody who knew what they were doing.
Yeah, but this is, I think, what I'm sort of challenging you on, Ben, on this is, are you underestimating the programming behind an AI engine to actually, when you prompt it, when you put boundaries and scaffolds around it, to say you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to speculate on what Napoleon might have said. The only thing you're allowed to use is first-hand sources or accounts, whatever they are, letters that Napoleon's written, or things where his voice is clear, speeches that have been written down. The only thing you're allowed to use is that. You're not allowed to speculate. You're not allowed to use you're not even allowed to use what historians have written about what Napoleon might have said. The only thing you're allowed to use is what he said. And that's literally all you're allowed to use to create this conversation.
Yeah, and that's good use of an interaction with a large language model. But that's not what's being packaged, and it's not what is. I mean, you can. I was on one of these sites, and I looked up this lady footballer, and she was talking about how her empowerment and resilience and all this sort of thing. I mean, essentially, it was hopelessly anachronistic in the sense that because it hadn't had that kind of input and preparation that you're talking about.
But that input and preparation though is relatively easy to achieve with prompt.
I mean, if you think about the number of microtransactions, every lesson, every resource, that's going to build up. And when somebody isn't as interested in these sorts of things as you and I are, then, and especially when someone comes back and says, "Hey guys, you could talk to people in the past," then with no caveats,
But my challenge on that point is, we've always had a level of technology in history teaching, and we've always had since the dawn of time teachers who do things in a different or better way than other teachers, or a more thorough way than other teachers, or they think about. That's been the case since the dawn of time. So regardless of the models, resources, technologies that you're using, does it just boil down to what the person in front of the class uses that technology for? And that's always been the case, and AI doesn't really change that.
It doesn't change that fundamental paradigm. I mean, I'm obviously not anti-AI. I'm just grassing it up, in terms of some of these, poor elements of practice. And as I say, I think that we've seen this before, haven't we? The video editing software, for example, came in and everyone was, wow, that's amazing. And what often tended to happen was that the teacher learned something because they made a video and then the kids watched it. And you just, well, okay, fine. What was the point of that? So yes, it is literally just a case of the buyer beware, I suppose. I guess what I feel like I'm seeing though is a harder sell of these things at a time when maybe teachers are arguably even more pressured than they've ever been, in terms of, say, producing resources. I mean, in most schools, I think they're largely discouraged from doing that, aren't they? They're sort of saying we have a trust level curriculum, and here's your resource. If it's Friday at 3:00, you should be on slide 8.
So if I was to ask you in like 3 sentences to summarize in the last 15 minutes, because you've more talked about AI as an engine in history teaching. So that element there, if you were to package that up into your 2 or 3 main criticisms into 2 or 3 sentences, what would they be?
It would be simple. Where's the stuff coming from?
Okay, right. Well, moving on from there, let's talk a little bit about assessment then, in history using AI. So this was just for anyone joining us now. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, I was sitting down with Daisy Christodoulou. We were talking about really, it was an extension of no more marking and delving into history specifically, and using comparative judgment. And the AI model that Daisy was using is one where if you're not familiar with comparative judgment, you can look it up. But essentially, you're comparing a large number of pieces of work. You're inputting all of that into AI. You're comparing one after the other. You're eventually training an AI model to distinguish one as better than the other, and then you're taking it further than that to eventually end up with a set of marks. Now, Daisy isn't here, and I've probably done a terrible job of summarizing that, but that's, comparative judgment into an AI generated thing. Now, I think, Ben, circling back to what you said at the beginning, you said you've got no issues with the sort of multiple choice and the way, AI marking multiple choice, right? But when it comes to the assessment side of it, what are your key sort of issues there?
Okay, well, I think the first thing really is the can I just say I'm delighted the No More Mark in Daisy's company is running a history project. I've been nagging them for years because I'm really interested. It's been frustrating that they've been ploughing that English furrow, understandably, and I just I'd love to know how this might work on a large scale for a history piece of work. So I'm absolutely thrilled they're doing it, and I've encouraged my teachers to sign up. So yeah, fully supportive on that front. I just feel like there were a number. There's a danger, if you like, of the logical fallacy of if your starting point, I think, is a little bit off, then you can follow a straight path, but you maybe shouldn't have started from that point. So my key thing here is over the issue of rubrics and mark schemes, which is the fact is even with comparative judgment, there is a rubric. Which one's better? So and then immediately, well, how are you deciding which one's better? Yeah. So actually, first of all, there is a rubric, and I think I think Daisy was a little bit harsh on the whole regime of of mark schemes. It's not mark schemes that are a problem. It's the abuse of mark schemes. It's the high stakes.
Ben, I joined forces with her on that particular point because I think a lot of mark schemes are garbage. I don't think they support teachers properly in the sense. I'd be happy to put one on screen now that I've been using recently, just last month. There is, unless you've got the examiner's report in front of you as well, which.
Well, okay. Help. Can I come back on that?
Yeah, sure.
I don't doubt that is a regular and very frustrating experience. No, I have it myself. We are with one particular board, and frankly, the published mark schemes are functionally useless. You get this thing of what is it? Level 1 is a sort of a summary. Level 2 is a clear summary, or that kind of thing, or it's consistent and more consistent, and all of these things that you can't sort of basically there's another mark scheme somewhere. So it's what I'm getting at really is to understand the problem of mark schemes is you should be able to sort of see the wider environment in which they take place. So the first one is league tables and all that is the high stakes attached to them. Second thing is it should be a good thing, shouldn't it? The schools can recall their mark scripts, but the problem is that the exam boards now have just said don't put anything on them, because they don't want pushback essentially as well. So be careful what you wish for, sort of thing. And this is where as I say, I think in the longer term, if we've got more of the automated marking, then with a smaller team of say principal examiners and chief examiners, you will at least get consistency. That's that's my view on where this goes in the long term. But ultimately, not all mark schemes are equal. I would like to think that the ones that we produce at OCR are much more kind of focused on specific and particular questions. I think probably some of the other boards, as I say, they have these behind the scenes mark schemes that they do actually use for that purpose. So I guess what I'm saying is, mark schemes are in the middle of a muddle. You can't just, it's not just mark schemes on their own that are causing a lot of the problems that we see. The second thing is that they are designed for assessment, for summative assessment at scale, at a very, very large scale. So 300,000 kids take GCSE history each year. So whatever you can do to iron out the kind of inconsistency and subjectivity, then that's what they try to do. So I don't think you can separate out the application of a mark scheme from the mark scheme itself. If you're not one of those examiners who's been trained in the application of a mark scheme, then actually the frustration that you described earlier on is, that is going to happen. There's no two ways about it. And my advice would always be to sort of say, well, don't use it as a teaching guide. Ultimately, what do you actually need? I mean, certainly, I don't encourage my teachers to go in this direction. We just concentrate more on quality answers to questions, and we use a model called CASE, which is just make a claim. Okay, so what's the question? What's your claim about it? What's your argument? Why do you think you're right? And can you support it with evidence? And we just drill that routine over and over again, and just forget about the mark schemes. Yeah, and so that with also the whole accountability thing. Ofqual, of course, is the other issue in all of this, which is the Ofqual determined that you can't repeat questions, for example. So because the current GCSEs didn't have a 5-year review built in, so there used to be a review every 5 years. You drew a line and you could reuse questions. Whereas now the poor examiners are desperately trying to find, really scraping the bottom of the barrel, trying to find a question for the sort of 12th or 13th iteration of a particular paper. So again, I'm just saying that there's a wider complexity to the problem. It's not just mark schemes bad. Mark schemes are in the middle of a bigger mess, if you like. And I think that from that point of view, I just wanted to kind of come out in defense of them a little bit. I think the second thing, I think this is illustrated to some extent by Daisy's specific project. So if your listeners haven't been there already, you'll see that there's a kind of an exemplar blog. So the basic question that they're going to test out is, why did William win the Battle of Hastings? And then there's an exemplar blog with 2 answers. One of which is, well, Daisy clearly thought was inferior, but essentially it answered the question. Whereas the second one, which was a nicer bit of writing, didn't answer the question. So do you want to answer the question or not? I think that's the thing. And can you imagine at scale with 300,000 kids? Oh, that's a nicer bit of writing. If the examiners are all doing that, then how is that fair? On the kid who maybe doesn't write as nicely and
but isn't that I think
doesn't answer the question.
But someone like Christine Council, for example, and again, I don't want to speak for Christine, but I would imagine that narrative storytelling is important when it comes to the communication. I mean, communication of history is important. So whilst I'm agreeing with you on the point of sort of a word salad around a central idea, there also has to be sort of credence to how something is written and how well something is written, surely in history as well.
Well, again, if that's what you want,
I mean, I don't know the example you're talking about, but yeah.
If that's what you want, then don't ask that question. Ask a different question, and develop a rubric for that. But as we know, that these narrative questions that have been brought into the exams don't work terribly well from what we've seen. But I think there's a deeper point there. We know from Sam Weinberg, for example, his brilliant piece about historical thinking and other unnatural acts. His basic point is that thinking like a historian is hard. We actually don't find it difficult to listen to and recount stories. We're absolutely hardwired to do that. But I would argue that the job of education is to help kids do hard things that they would probably prefer to avoid. And that prepares them for life. So if you took the two examples that are on Daisy's blog, I would say, first of all, it would be really quite easy to turn the allegedly weaker answer into a better one just simply by adding some more sort of factual information, some more supporting evidence. And then it would become, instead of being the skeleton that it is, it would actually become a very good answer. Now, I think that would be relatively easy for that. I mean, obviously, we know they're hypothetical kids, but let's assume they exist for a minute. I think it would be comparatively easy for a teacher to show that student, this is how you get this from being okay to being really good. I have no idea whether that other one is capable of doing it because he's just written a story. Can he grasp the concept, the second order concepts that the other kid is using to manage their response to the question we've asked? And she talked about this thing about an implicit answer. I just think, well, that's pretty rough, isn't it? The first of all, where does the consistency come in? How implicit does it have to be? Whereas the other one has explicitly said a reason why William won was this. You can't get a lot clearer. And if you're going to say, yeah, but he would have said that if he'd thought of it, that's a bit of a slippery slope, it would seem to me. And secondly, is that what he meant? Would he be able to answer that question? And if you wanted to sort of take it to a logical absurdity, then let's imagine, okay, what's the value of all of this then? If the student who's written the second, slightly more flowery version, which is nicer to read as a story, so to speak, if you said, okay, right, we've got to fight another battle now. Our second student has basically sort of, he might know how to set up or what things to avoid or what to do. The other one definitely knows because he's identified the reasons why William won. So, I think there's a huge.
Are you ready yet for my devil's advocate stuff on this?
Go for it. I thought it would be around the corner.
Well, before I hedge into that, let me just remind everybody a fantastic shout out to our sponsors on Teachers Talk Radio, John Catt Educational. If you want to visit the John Catt Bookshop, then head over there, johncattbookshop.com, grab yourself a book or three and get 20% off by using the code JCTTR2425. And also, if you are interested in all things teaching and learning, another podcast that you should 100% check out is Anna Stokey's podcast, Chalk and Talk. Have you heard of that one, Ben?
Yep.
It's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, no, well, yeah. I mean, I learned about it from you, so
wonderful. Well, there you go. But it's a fantastic. She's actually based in Canada, so yeah. A lot of what she does is maths orientated and international or global oriented. But she had Nick Gibb on. I know she had Nick Gibb on the last episode. It was really interesting. So yeah, check out Anna Stokey's podcast, Chalk and Talk. And of course, as already mentioned, John Catt. So get involved there. But anyway, Ben, my devil's advocate stuff here for you is I get what you're saying, right? I understood what you were saying. But let's just imagine for a minute that you have 300,000 GCSE history exams coming in, right? And let's just imagine, for the sake of our conversation, that they're all the same paper. Just for our conversation's sake, okay? Yep. They're all doing exactly the same paper with the same answers being asked of. Now, they are also using the same mark schemes, the same, whatever you want to call them, the same guidance, mark schemes, whatever. And in fact, the same input into those mark schemes from experts behind the scenes from various different exam boards. Let's imagine, right, into what that one mark scheme looks like, because it's the same paper for everybody that we're talking about, right? And let's imagine that we took all of those papers, we scanned all of them, we spent 6 months developing a large language model that was just focused on being able to mark those papers, or at the very least tell us, whether it's using comparative judgment or otherwise, what those marks and what those grades were going to be on those papers, right? So we spent 6 months developing it, and then we fed those 300,000 papers in. And in fact, what we probably do is feed in 300,000 papers from the previous year that we had on file and said to them, listen, this is our mock. Look at these 300,000, get a little bit of idea. Let's get some humans to check what you've done as well. And then go for it with the next 300,000. We're some way away from that. But my question to you is, are you saying that humans would do a better job than the AI in that circumstance?
No.
Isn't that the ultimate answer then to everything we're discussing? Isn't it better?
I mean, I personally, I mean, this is a personal view, not an exam board view or anything like that. I just don't see why wouldn't you do that. But what I would do is to say that, you know, the humans keep the reins on the horse. You know, in the same way that at the moment we're in the middle of exam marking. I think team leaders, for example, you know, yeah, the marking of the same principle.
I get that, but I think in Daisy's example, and actually I think this is probably the way it's going to go across the board, is there's an option on I think with Daisy's example for you to basically check what the AI's done after, like, I don't know if it's 10 papers, 20 papers, 30 papers, whatever. You've got the opportunity there for the teacher to go, right, I'm going to sort of check in here and just see if I'm happy, and then roll it on for another 30 and then check in and see what's happy. I can't remember what she said. You know, I think it was I think there was some sort of check-in mechanism in there. But anyway, I can't envisage a scenario, whatever engine's being used, because there's going to be loads of sort of competition in this space. So whatever engine's being used, there's always going to have to be, and there will be, human checking.
Yeah, no argument there. Will be.
So suggesting that there isn't going to be, or there might not be, it's just not going to happen. In my opinion, there's always going to be a human check somewhere. I'm not saying it'll be back in every single one, but once you've built, you're still. My point is, if you're going to get more accuracy on any answer over a block of 100,000 papers using AI than using humans, why would you not use AI?
I think we might be slightly at cross purposes here, in the sense that I'm absolutely, you know, advocating the use of AI for that purpose with the human checking. But what I'm saying as well is that I'm very, very nervous about, you know, comparative judgment along the lines that Daisy was talking, and she was probably just, you know, sort of yanking everybody's chain a little bit. You know, we need to know if your AI is going to make a decision about which of the two it compares at any one moment. If it's going to make a decision about which one's better, we need to know what that decision is based on. And similarly,
in our conversation, and I would presume in any sort of AI ed tech company that did the same thing, you'd be basing it on mark schemes, wouldn't you?
Well, I mean, this is what I've been working on right now, and I think the big difference as well is that if you can invest in the human aspect of it, of the writing of the schemes, more writers, more
the prompts are better. And my point is, this is where I disagree with you. I'm sure you mentioned one particular example earlier, and yeah, full disclosure, I'm pretty sure you work for them, Ben. So you're probably going to have again, we talk about AI and bias here, but what I'm saying is my cynicism on mark schemes. I've been with maybe 5 exam boards since I've started teaching, 5 different ones, maybe loads, right? You name it, I've probably been there at some point on it. I just think the standard of the mark schemes across the board has been relatively poor, and even good ones are poor.
I don't disagree with you. There's a lot of inconsistency. Again, something else to bear in mind is that when these current iterations were set out, Ofqual, for reasons which were never really explained, they indicated that every question should have 5 levels, regardless of what the question was. Before the current regime, we had as many levels as we needed for whatever the question was, and we could adapt those things. Now, this is part of this wider, accountability, command and control culture that we're faced with. What I've been working on with a different example with AQA is taking their basic, sort of 4-level answers and breaking each of those levels down into a granular level further. So sometimes my level 1 has 4 sub-levels.
But that's all that's all as a teacher I'm asking for.
Well, and it has had a massive impact. Most of my teachers sort of say that's had an incredible impact on my teaching and on my understanding. We had the classic problem where, in fact, what we're describing here, a lot of our teachers were sort of giving the level 3, which is where you basically start to answer the question. Whereas, in fact, most of these answers were just long, nice level 2s. They were stories that didn't answer the question and might have implicitly hinted at it. And, a lot of the teachers have said our marking is now more accurate, but also our teaching's better because we know what it is we're trying to get them to do, and that comes back to this claim and argument. But the big difference is that when you drop that granular mark scheme into a large language model, then it does a pretty decent job of marking. We've been test driving this on mock exams, and you get that consistency, internal consistency, but broadly speaking, we don't get a huge difference between the human markers and the AI marking either.
Well, Daisy was saying that, I mean, in her, I don't know what research she was referring to, but she definitely said in the conversation that the accuracy was better with AI than with the humans. Not by lot, but it was generally better because you're cutting out all of that bias, all the people being tired and making mistakes, all the weaknesses in the way they look at things and all the rest of it. I think the point you were making earlier about the writing, right? I understand your point about what you're trying to say. But again, and this is probably where I've come at it since the beginning of our conversation, I think a lot of this depends on the prompts. A lot of it also depends on what's being inputted into that AI to then do it. Because ultimately, I believe that AI is always ultimately going to be better than you and me, Ben.
Yeah.
Because it will have the knowledge of 55 Ben Walshes, right? 100 Scott Allsops, 50,000 Daisy Christodoulous, right? And let's be honest, her brain is no. Let's not talk about her brain. But
I was just going to say the galaxy isn't big enough.
Right. So the 55,000 of her, right, into this thing, right? So it's always going to be. I understand your point. Like when you use ChatGPT, Okay, and you go, "Hey, ChatGPT, make me a social media post about about something I've got planned," and it'll come up with something that's just not bland and like a regurgitation, right? Because it's a quick, easy thing, and you put one sentence in as a prompt, and that's what you get out. And actually, you might have to do like 20 rehashes of that prompt to get anything like what you would like, right, out of it. But that's where I guess working on the large language models over time, inputting enough material, giving them enough prompts, letting them work with the material enough would have the desired impact. So I'm sort of, I suppose what I'm digging into here is, Ben, based on our whole conversation, is what's your key concern? Because you're basically saying, yes, AI will probably market more accurately or as accurately overall as human markers. Humans can improve mark schemes to make the mark schemes better. And in fact, if you're using a large language model, you could get 100 people to input into a single mark scheme and then feed that into the large language model and let the large language model try and improve it from there. So I guess what I'm getting at is what is the issue with it?
There isn't. I mean, the consistency is the big win in my view, because then even if there is a problem, it'll be a consistent problem, because that's one of the big problems we have with human marking. Is not only can it be inaccurate, but it can also be inconsistent as well. So, as I say, the consistency is your big win. The provisos on that are that obviously, the boards continue to invest in the human capital in the sense of the people who write questions and write better and better and better mark schemes. But also, I think that if you're taking away, Dylan William makes this point rather nicely, that he sort of says, teachers don't do much in the way of, teachers generally don't do things that aren't worth doing. Yeah. But there are things that are more worth doing than other things, and he singles out marking as an example of this. Marking's not a bad thing, but actually, is it the most sort of effective thing? What if you didn't have to mark? What could you do? And that is kind of where we're getting to with this. But like I said, it still comes back to this idea that it's got to be rigorous and it's got to answer the question set. Don't abandon the question. Change the question. If the kids aren't writing about or in the way of the thing that you don't like, then change the question, change the challenge, and hopefully we get a bit more headspace to be able to do that kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I had an English teacher I worked with many years ago now, and he said to me in a sort of quiet whisper in a classroom, "Hey, just to let you know, last year with my 3 GCSE groups, I marked nothing. The exam results have just come through and they were better for all of those groups than the previous cohort where I'd marked everything." Now, I'm not seeing that as an argument to never mark anything, right? That's not what I'm seeing it as. However, I can believe it. So therefore, I'm going, if there's problems with AI and marking, let's just dive into them. Let's solve them. Let's try and make it better, because ultimately that is way better than human beings wasting huge chunks of time.
Absolutely.
Doing stuff. It's just, yeah, that's the way I look at it.
Like I said, if it's good enough for Dylan William, it's good enough for me.
We feed his brain into the large language model.
That's right. Yeah.
But we can pick maybe 10 and just put them into this large language model. Yeah. No, you spot on. We've had some comments which we'll finish off with. Layla says no need for constant marking though, more formative. Okay. Mike, so surely the most important aspect of, I'm guessing it means of exams, of assessments, is to give feedback for a student to improve their work. Why can't AI not help with this?
In my experience, it will do that, but it tends to, in my experience, it tends to sort of give you either the counsel of perfection, or it's just not phrased in a way that a kid knows what to do with it. You see what I mean? And I've no doubt that it will get better at that as time goes on. But right now, I mean, I'm actually working with our trying to write out a script of me working with a student to produce an essay. So we're going to try and use that and turn that into a set of prompts to create a sort of tutor bot in time. But it's time consuming. It takes a long time to do that well.
Layla's also said AI helps with marking when provided with strict rubrics and rules, but it also makes mistakes a lot. It can't replace the human teacher's feedback.
And this is what I say about the supervision.
Yeah,
in the same way that senior examiners supervise examiners.
What we're talking about is what's better, aren't we? We're saying human beings make mistakes and the AI makes mistakes. Who's going to make less mistakes? Right.
And it for me keeps coming back to the consistency thing. That's your real win.
But I do take your point in terms of what's inputted. I mean, what is inputted is as important as what comes out, because if you're inputting something that's effective, that making sure that you've tested it numerous times with the LLM, then you're more likely to get something decent from it. Coming back to the prompts and stuff, but I also take your point about sort of there's been an explosion, hasn't there, of ed tech companies, AI companies, AI in education, all the rest of it. And I guess like with anything that comes new on the scene, as teachers have got to sort of be careful in terms of what they invest in, what they use. And but I also take your point that a new teacher or somebody who maybe isn't confident in the history part of it might struggle to know what is, you were giving the example of two different periods in Victorian London, right? If you gave that to me and you said, here's, year one and here's year two, tell me which one's which and tell me why. I think there'd be a lot of history teachers who'd struggle with that.
Yeah.
They wouldn't like to say they did, right? But I think they would. Same with like Battlefield in 1940 versus Battlefield in 1945, right? Things like that. Battlefield in 1914, Battlefield in 1917, right? Those I'd be more confident on, right? For me, but that's my level. That's my expertise, and that every history teacher is going to have their own.
But that kind of subtle differentiation is the kind of thing that at the moment the AI is not really all that good at.
Sure. I agree with that. Yeah. But my argument is that AI video is going to accelerate so fast.
Yeah, no, I can see that, but it's still going to. It's still struggling, I think, to engage with the reality that the past is gone. You can't bring it back. And we don't absolutely know for sure what it looked like, sounded like, smelt like, and certainly not in a universal way. And I guess this is still my fundamental problem with almost anything that's pitched at history teachers by non-historians, is that they do struggle to get the idea that there's a difference between events and history. History is how you make sense of the events, and that's.
Don't you know that in recent years that's become more on trend to see history as, I'm not saying completely, but maybe that movement back towards dates, facts, events, things that happen.
Yeah, I mean, you need those things. There's no question about it. But actually, that's that's the difference between knowledge rich and information heavy, isn't it?
Sure.
I think we're all kind of on board with the idea of knowledge rich, whereas
some people aren't, Ben.
Well,
not everybody. Can't speak for everybody.
Obviously, it depends on how you define it. I would argue the disciplinary knowledge, combined with the way I like to think of it is like a coin. One side is substantive knowledge, the other side is disciplinary knowledge, and it doesn't really make any sense to try and think about one without the other.
Sure. Ben, we've run out of time. It's been fantastic to talk to you. Absolute pleasure. Some really interesting points raised. We're going to have to get Daisy back on. Let's get Daisy back on. We're going to keep doing this all year. We're going to have Daisy, and then a month later, Ben. It'll be like triple marking.
Yeah.
It'll be like that, but on TTR. No, it's been great. Really good conversation. And thank you very much for joining me.
My pleasure. Good to see you again, Tom.
That was Ben Walsh talking about AI, history teaching, assessment, and all things in between. If you're interested in the other conversation I had with Daisy Christodoulou, that is available on the Teachers Talk Radio website. Just go on the listen back page and type in history and AI, and you'll find it. Or it's on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all the other ones. Huge shout out to all our listeners and watchers this evening, particularly Layla, Mike, Paul, various other people across our different channels who've been thrown in the comments. If you've watched on X or YouTube or LinkedIn or anywhere else, thank you very much. And don't forget to drop us a like and a subscribe if you are watching on YouTube or anywhere else. Don't forget to do that, and do, of course, follow us on your podcast platform of choice as well. We've got new shows coming out nearly every day. And in fact, just to give it a little plug, tonight, Seema Aggarwal, 9 p.m. should be a really interesting one. She's looking at the debate as whether things always need to be referenced in higher education. So that should be an interesting one at 9 o'clock with two guests, sort of different sides of the coin on that debate. So that should be a good one to tune into at 9 p.m. tonight. And on Wednesday, we've got a show at 6 p.m. looking at the future of GCSE maths. What should GCSE maths look like by the year 2030? So again, could be interesting to maybe think about AI and maybe think about some other things, but that'll be a conversation on Wednesday. Got a panel of 3 guests with Catherine Clark, the maths goddess, hosting it. So thank you very much. And we'll be back again later on tonight. Cheers, everyone, and take care. Bye.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused